Okay, I've got a couple minutes before the class starts up again. A quick impromptu tutorial. Some people asked me about carbohydrates. The easiest way in is to start ramping up the protein sources during the day, because most Americans are a little low on that, so it'll keep most of my patients kind of busy just finding a source of protein. And I try to get them to embrace plant-based protein if possible. That, in addition to fiber, definitely helps satiety. And I'm not one to just go with the low-carb diet, but I think that anybody with a body mass index greater than 25 is asking for trouble, especially if the sugar is at pre-diabetes levels, that's higher than 100. Or if the LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, total cholesterol is all unbalanced. When you have all those things, in addition to maybe high blood pressure, lack of exercise, high stress job, you're asking for trouble. Even though there's no symptoms, even though there might not be a family history, I would always say, if you're gonna come to me, I want perfection. I probably shouldn't say perfection. I would always aim for a goal, and sometimes I'm a little strict, so I give them a goal of try to bring down that body mass index. And a lot of folks have never hit a BMI of less than 30, and that's okay. It's just a goal. You don't have to hit that goal, but if you have nothing else to shoot for, then it's gonna be easy to fall off the wagon. As soon as you get hungry or work becomes 50 hours a week and traffic starts to pick up in the wintertime, you're gonna say, what Sigil said was not really that important. I got more obvious things. I'm not gonna see him in 3 months, so I got a lot of time to kill. Well, guess what? 3 to 4 months goes by fast, and if you don't make changes that are sustainable, you're probably not gonna make changes. I wouldn't just wait for January 1st. When there is enthusiasm and group effort, if you find other people in the household or at work, you're gonna run into places that are super crowded. I hate going to Planet Fitness where I work out during January and February because it's just so crowded and people are just talking, and I'm trying to get in and out with 30 minutes of high intensity interval training. I can't do it. So either I go at the ends of the day or night, or I just don't work out and I pick something else of my first aid kit to pull out as far as a routine. But anyway, the idea would be that a low carb diet might be the next step after maximizing on fiber, maximizing on protein. There's a lot of evidence that says that carbohydrates are usually associated with obesity, and obesity with metabolic syndrome, diabetes, whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a good correlation. It's not that you should go down to zero carbohydrates. I mean, there's only 3 different big macronutrients. It's proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And I think of all the crap that's out there, carbohydrates are really what gets people to go back into the bad foods they're not supposed to have, because a lot of the foods that say low fat, there's no taste in low fat. When you pull fat away from something, it doesn't taste that great. So how do you make it taste good? Carbohydrates. So you have to be really careful. I think that food companies are getting savvy, and they're putting different things in as far as names, but you have to really be a label reader. One of my patients asked me, well, isn't a sugar a carbohydrate? And on the label, there's proteins, fats, carbohydrates, calories, and a couple other things. But technically, a sugar is a carbohydrate. A sugar can be broken down into monosaccharides and disaccharides. There's only a couple. And then when you link all those together, 10 or less of the sugar molecules is equal to a carbohydrate. They're called oligosaccharides. And 10 or more of those sugar molecules, those individual small sugar molecules, is equal to a polysaccharide. And that's pretty much in a nutshell. You can watch that stuff on the internet. So carbohydrates are made of sources, but the complexity is, what is the carbohydrate also carrying with it, or which bonds does it have? Carbohydrates, if they're bonded very strongly, will be harder to break down. The problem that I see is that when you take in food that has essentially carbohydrates that disintegrate immediately once it gets to the gastrointestinal tract, it gets absorbed immediately, and you'll have a massive amount of bloodstream glucose, because everything gets broken down into glucose, and it goes into the liver after hitting the bloodstream from the GI tract.
And if the liver gets this onslaught of a lot of glucose suddenly, it's got to figure out what to do with it. So what does it do? It does what it does best. It tries to detoxify the bloodstream, or at least change that high concentration. It puts it into fat, or makes fat, which is a problem, because I think that if you overdo that carbohydrate source and you're not exercising and or you're stressed out, a lot of things go into adipose tissue, and then you have that high adiposity, that kind of pear-shaped adrenal fatigue kind of body. Well, if you continue on that course, number one, carbohydrates and the reaction that the insulin goes through after the body tries to protect itself and makes a lot of insulin, dumps a lot of that glucose into the cell. The massive shift that occurs to protect the bloodstream also makes you go through an insulin dump. And during that time, after all the glucose is out of the bloodstream and all the sugar is processed into fat, well, suddenly the body dumps down because there's no energy that's available. It over-treated itself, and you start hunting for more stuff. And what are you going to hunt for? The stuff that gives you the fastest rise in energy, supposedly energy, and that's going to be carbohydrate food, or something that's high glycemic index. Like before a party, if hunting reflex is being turned on, that's almost like fight or flight. So your decision-making process will be a little bit off. So if you go to a party hungry and you see a bunch of trays, good stuff, bad stuff, pastries, your brain will automatically see the pastries in the corner and be attracted to them, because you know, or the brain knows from previous experience, that will give you the fastest rise. So you see that bad cycle that comes up. And then the normal treatment plan for having indulged in that is to aggressively exercise or fast again. Some people can do well if they aggressively exercise, but if you're doing a 50-hour work week, where are you going to fit that in? You're not going to have time to exercise. Granted, when you do exercise, you feel good, almost better than you feel when you eat the food that's bad for you. So I really would say that if you can, try to hold off on carbohydrates. At least go for the low glycemic index carbs. If you have a choice and you have high glycemic index and low glycemic index, in other words, foods that'll evaporate and dissolve fast into the bloodstream and foods that take some time to digest, go for these. They might not, according to the brain, be as tasty as the other ones, but they'll keep you out of harm's way somewhat. If you have no choice whatsoever, my usual trick is you get fiber into the gut within 30 minutes. And everybody that watches my videos, you can take fiber in the form of grains, unless you're a paleo follower. So do external grains like acacia that comes from the tree in Africa, or psyllium. Both of those I've done videos on. And that way, it's not really part of your meal, but if you dump it into your belly after you have your carbohydrate load, it kind of neutralizes that and turns what's called the glycemic load into something low. So you kind of neutralize your food, or you dump in protein into that. And sometimes, worst case scenario, you can take fiber pills if you can't get any of that stuff. But they're expensive. Over a 2-week time period, you might have to get used to it. But usually if you continue with the fiber that supports the probiotic that you're eating, and you continue with making wise choices on low glycemic index carbohydrates, and you try to make a low glycemic load meal, and you exercise a little bit, and you practice some form of mindful practice, especially when you're starting to get hungry and you're going out to a meal, I think that'll keep you out of harm's way. In a nutshell, the carbohydrates are, I think, a necessary evil. The only problem is the type of carbohydrates that we're exposed to, when we're exposed to them, and how much we're exposed to them. So there's just more of that stuff that really is available.
This is a little bit better than your gasoline truck stop, but actually it's pretty good. At least an assortment of stuff to eat, midnight maybe, and then a tiny pharmacy.
You can see if somebody is here and they don't want to wait for delivery service to bring their food, they go downstairs, they eat what's available, and it's not bad. It's better than gasoline station food or 7-Eleven food. So I think just being knowledgeable about where you're going, what you're supposed to be eating, maybe having your choices, whether it's meals ready to eat, those grab-and-go meals that you might have to buy or load up on a Sunday so that you're okay for the rest of the week, or you get a little more educated and experienced with cooking. Either way, as long as you empower yourself with being comfortable about the choices that you're making, the type of food, or which theory or which author to follow,
I don't think there is just one. Altogether, they all have their strengths. Whoever you use to jumpstart, I would always say, eventually you want to get to a stable level, maybe of a combination of all the authors and or your own practice, where you're using your ethnicity, what you're exposed to when you're a kid, what's available in your local environment, or what resonates with you and what resonates with your family. If you get all that stuff together and what you can afford, then I think you can get on a smooth track of some form of nutritional practice that's healthy. Keeps you out of harm's way. I guarantee if you have a really good nutritional practice, eventually the weight will come off. Eventually, with the weight coming off, the pills, the prescriptions will stop. So the idea is jumpstart, empower yourself with knowledge, continue to chip away, reformulate a plan, and have a goal at the end. And also have a team behind you. When it comes to hitting the wall, at least you might have a couple of options to be bouncing off questions and or problem solving when you get to that point, because everybody gets to that point. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'm going to get back to my conference. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to me for weekly words of wisdom.